Welcome. My name is Mary Ann Cappiello. I'm a professor of language and literacy at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I teach pre-service teachers and I write about the role of children's and young adult literature across the curriculum K-12. And I'm delighted to be here today with Traci, Sorell, and Will Chavez, the authors of Riding the Trail, Cherokees Remember the Removal, about a 950-mile journey that retraces the Trail of Tears while connecting Cherokee youth to their history, culture, and community. Riding the Trail is an inspiring, photo-rich nonfiction book that follows 6 Native youths riding to remember the history of the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Nation's Remember the Removal bicycle ride is a youth leadership program that includes a 3-week, nearly 1,000-mile memorial ride to commemorate the forced removal of Cherokee people. The program teaches culture, history, and language as youth cycle the same route their ancestors walked from 1838 to 1839. There are nearly 300 alumni, including co-author Will Chavez here today, who is also a coordinator of the program. Before we jump into talking about the book, I'd like to give the authors a moment to introduce themselves. Traci, would you like to get us started?
So, I'm Traci Sorell. I am a co-author of this book, and I write fiction and nonfiction for young people. I live within the Cherokee Nation Reservation. This is where I was born and grew up, and where my family has been since the forced removal. So the topic and the book are something that have touched, my life personally, but also have been something that I very much wanted to know more about. And so this book has given me the opportunity to do that in a very personal and an obviously professional way.
My name is Will Chavez, and I am Cherokee and Pueblo Indian. My father is Pueblo Indian from New Mexico, and my mom is Cherokee. And I was raised in Oklahoma mostly, and did not know much about the Trail of Tears as growing up. It just wasn't discussed. There's not much in our Oklahoma history books about that occurrence. So there was a chance in 1984, when I was 17, to learn more about this terrible tragedy, and also take part in a youth leadership program. And I applied and got to be part of that team, the inaugural team, and it's been in my heart since. It never let go of me after we did that first ride, and I wanted to help when the ride came back in 2009, and I've helped most of those years since then, and also did the ride again in 2017 as a 50-year-old mentor rider, which opened my eyes again to what I'd missed when I was a youth. But this book is really meaningful to me, and it's something that I'm glad I got to take part in and work with Traci on this.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, Traci. We're really excited to have this conversation with you and to hear more about the process of creating Riding the Trail. The book provides such an opportunity for readers to think about the presence of history in this moment, in their lives, how stories of resilience and identity and activism can be shared with young people again, and why those stories are so important at this particular moment in time. So for both of you, I'd love to start us off by thinking about the historical and the contemporary nature of the book and of the Remembrance Ride, and what first drew each of you to this story.
For myself, I had, because I do write for young people as my full-time career, I've had several people say, you really should write about the Trail of Tears. And I'm thinking, but there are plenty of books about the Trail of Tears, that have been written, and certainly one for this age group and beyond by Theda Perdue. And so I thought, if I were to write about this topic, how would I approach it that presents something different? And I thought about this wonderful program that the Cherokee Nation has through its education department, this youth leadership development program. And what I saw as a way to show not just our own Cherokee young people or other Native children or, teens, tweens, everyone, adults, even beyond those among Native nations, that there are chapters that came after the Trail of Tears. As Will mentioned, in history books, that literally is where it stops for us. There is nothing after that. And yet we have certainly survived after the 1830s. But this is, to me, a vibrant way to show that and to show the effect that the history has had on our lives and the challenges we've faced and why the program was created in the first place, but then also how our young people today are taking their participation in this program and really charting our future. It's just incredible.
Well,
I think it's mentioned in the book that at one point about the 1984 ride when we were out there partly to remind the American public what had happened with the Trail of Tears and what happened that our people survived, because we would meet people out there and they would say, "Cherokees, I thought you all were extinct," or "I thought you all were all wiped out." And so when Traci brought this up, I thought this was another opportunity to educate the public about what happened and the fact that we're still here. And we have these youth that are going out there every summer to, that's just a reminder that we're still here and that we survived that time period. And also wanted to share the history of the ride in the book. We touch on that a little bit, how the ride started and what it is today and what it takes to do the ride. So I think this book's probably a long time coming. People have asked me also to write a book about just a bike ride, but never had time and never knew how I would approach it anyway. But so I think this book touches on a lot of items that people probably don't know about or didn't know much about before. So I'm glad it's out. It's coming out, and it's going to be educational, not for our people, but for others in the American public.
Could each of you speak a little bit about, in the process of writing this book, what are some of the things that you learned from the youth writers that stayed with you the most or surprised you the most? And I know you're going to come at this from different angles because, of course, Will, you were one of those youth writers on that initial ride. And so your set of experiences is different than Traci's. But for each of you, I'd love to know a little more about what you learned from the youth writers of today.
You want to go first, Will?
Well, I mean, every year, every team is different. And it's no exception with this team. They started training in 2020 to go, or actually 2019, but then COVID came in and stopped everything all over the United States, and we were told we couldn't go, and which was understandable, and really it didn't discourage this team. They understood, and they knew they had to keep training if they wanted to try to go again in 2021. And I keep harping on that as their trainer, as their coordinator. You all need to continue training it, because the first thing they're going to ask when we ask to go next year is, are they ready? Have they been training? And that was the first question that was asked of me when I asked to go again in 2021. And so this team, I'll always be really proud of them for, just staying dedicated and keeping up with their training and being ready to go when we asked again. We had 9 team members to start out with for this team, and ended up taking only 5 from that team. We added another person before we left in 21, but we lost 4 team members from 2020 to 2021 because those 4 did not want to continue training. They didn't want to train for another year, which I understand that too. But I was just really, I'll always be proud of the dedication the five that stayed showed.
Yeah, that also stayed with me because they weren't able to always be training together. And a huge part of this experience is they take classes together, they train together, and they are supposed to be obviously working out by themselves too, but they weren't able to spend that time together in a group. And when they were able to, then they were on Zoom doing classes and things, and so there's a lot of heart that goes into that commitment to say, even though I can't be with everyone else, I want to continue doing this. The other part is it is very difficult to do this ride. And it is not just the physical ride. Like, it is going to these sites and seeing where your ancestors lived, because they all had their genealogy done. So they knew the families that they came from. And when you visit these places, and you see the beauty of the places that we had across our homeland, and that they were forcibly, taken out of these places and rounded up and put into internment camps, right, and treated as prisoners. And it is difficult. And then you get on the bike and you go to the next place and you hear the story there. And this happens, the entire way. And at some point you get to where it's a mass trail of graves. And so their ability to use humor and connect at the end of the day to balance that, I was just always like, yes, what a gift that they can help. And that's something that's very important to Cherokee culture. And we talk about all the time, is maintaining balance. But it is difficult to do when you're physically exhausted after cycling 65 miles and many days it's hot. Like I say, the heaviness of being in these places where so much suffering has happened. And yet their youthful demeanor, just having that ability to laugh at each other, laugh at themselves, like kind of reset. And I was so grateful for that, because for myself, I wasn't cycling with them, I was following them. And so I'm really, kind of this just observer, right, of the process. And I thought, I don't know how they're going to do this tomorrow. And then, they would just come together and I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. Just so impressed.
Yeah, all that comes through in the book so beautifully. The register of all of those emotions. For Will, as co-author, as a prior participant, as someone who's coordinated so many annual Remember the Removal rides, how do you think your personal experience shaped the writing of this book and how the story is told?
I think my experience goes all the way back to 1984 with the mentors I had back then. There were two men that started the ride, Mose Killer and Mike. Anyway, Mose and Mike, they were truly mentors, and they as a youth leadership program, they wanted to make leaders out of us for the future, for the tribe. And the way they handled things, the way they let us handle things on the road, did that for us. And most of us have gone on and done good things and had good careers and things. And I think it's mainly because of their influence. And we also had other elders that were with us that were either cooking for us or just being our mentors and taking care of us. I never forgot those lessons, and I carried them all these years through college, through the Army. And when I had the opportunity to start coordinating and training these riders, I used their lessons with these kids. And that's what I wanted to get across in the book, is that they are our future leaders. They are in training to be our future leaders by doing this ride. And so I wanted that to come across in the book, that they're not just out there riding a bike every day and going from point A to point B. They are there's a purpose to this ride, as a youth leadership program and as a history lesson for the public out there. That's mainly what I wanted to get across in the book, and I think Traci and I did a good job of getting that and putting that in there and having that be part of the book.
Mm. That lens of mentorship and intergenerational mentorship, I do think it permeates the book in so many different ways, both on the ride and when you think about the time that elapsed between the removal and the start of the rides, and the mentoring of the Cherokee people of the past with the Cherokee people of the present, as well as your own personal experiences. Thank you for that. So Traci, for you, you've written so much about Native history and identity in your other books, like the picture book We Are Grateful, O Jali Heliga, and We Are Still Here, as well as Mascot, your middle grade novel in verse. And so, having had those experiences of writing, what felt particularly important for you or different for you to tell to a middle grade audience with this book and taking on a nonfiction photo illustrated book as a format for it?
Mm-hmm. For this book, I definitely wanted it to be pictures. I wanted color. I wanted young people to see, again, to, point we raised earlier, we are still here. We still exist today, and you can see that in color. You can also see the 1984 riders in color, right? We don't have any pictures of our ancestors because we didn't have photography then to document what happened during the removal. We certainly have the accounts, and that's what the riders read. And so I wanted to share in the book, firsthand accounts from those on the removal and what that sounded like, as well as those who are writing today. What are their voices? What are they experiencing? But then to match that with those color photos, to say, this is the place where this happened. You can go to this place. It exists. These are real people that have experienced this. And there are young people now that are visiting these places, that are connected to these people. These are part of their lineage. And I feel like that is a stronger way to share the story, to give them, and I'm so grateful for Diane Early, our creative director. I mean, she, we of course, had photos for her to choose from, right? Will is a photo, award-winning photojournalist as well as, so he takes pictures as well as writes articles, and he's an assistant editor. The Cherokee Nation, the communications department, Josh Newton, he took a number of pictures. And so we had a lot of pictures, and Will thankfully organized all of those into the different parts of the ride so Diane could choose. And I think she just did a masterful job of picking pictures that went with, our text to really accentuate those points where we want young people to understand, like when we're standing around that grave singing. There's just points where there's a photo there, and it just, you understand like what's happening in that scene more because of, like I say, the photos that accompany it. So that part for me was I wanted it to be real, and an illustration can sometimes make people think that it's fiction, or like it's just someone's imagination. There's nothing to anyone's imagination in this book. This is all factual. Yeah, these things really happened, and our young people are doing this ride to bear witness to those things.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we can zoom in on that a little further. You've both talked about the ways in which the writers experience the connection between the past and the present while on the journey. And certainly I've had the honor and the benefit of being able to read the book. But for our listeners who maybe have not yet read the book, can you maybe highlight a couple of examples in the book where the writers were really able to connect back with a specific moment in the removal?
I have a good example of that. We had our first 2 days of the ride. When we start in Georgia, we have a historian go with us. He's traveling with the group, and His name is Jack Baker. He's actually the national president of the Trail of Tears Association. So he's well versed in this history, and he'll get the list of the riders' names and research their families for them. And then, of course, they have their genealogy made, and a lot of them ended up being cousins on the ride. So that's always a neat aspect too. But Jack, I saw him before in Georgia mostly. We'll take aside a few of the riders and say, your family lived just down this road here, and this is where they were pulled from their homes and pushed down the road up to Tennessee. It really brings home to those riders, that they're standing where their family stood.
Yeah.
The connection, Traci already mentioned the mass graves that we run into on the way through these 7 states. Some of the riders will understand that their family walked down that road. They were with a particular group and they walked on the road they're riding their bikes on then. And I mentioned to them before, it's not out of the realm of possibility you're riding over your family's grave or graves where the road was built on top of them, or the road were right in adjacent to graves that we don't know about, because most of the graves on the trail that were people that were buried on the trail they're all unmarked, and so or most are unmarked, and so it's always there, and I think Traci mentioned it can be exhausting to see that and experience all of that as you're going through these states and coming home.
They're like Will was saying, Jack is explaining to them different places, and one of the early evenings in the trip, he asked, if people were interested in going off and looking at a cabin that remains from that time. And that happened to be one of the ancestors of a mentor rider, Traci Asbill. We saw Eric Conrad's cabin. At the same time, you look across the road, and there are these kind of, just huge horse farms and all of this stuff. And you think, this is where all of our ancestors lived, right? These palatial, and so it's really, it's heartbreaking at the same time to think that, and it's wonderful that cabin still exists, and the people that own that land are maintaining it. But at the same time, we don't get to live there anymore. That's not where we're at. And then not very far from where many internment camps were in southeastern Tennessee, the riders will go to what is called the Cherokee Removal Memorial Park. And that's right at the confluence or the intersection of the Tennessee and the Hiawassee rivers. And there is a wonderful memorial there, and they have lists of all these Cherokee people that are listed on the 1835 census. And of course, that census was put together and then later utilized to help make lists of people to be on the detachments and for removal and things. But they're able to trace with pencil and pen, and you see a picture of Melanie in the book, that they're all tracing their different ancestors and finding out who was on the removal. And so that's a real touch point before they and of course at that time they would go across on ferries. People had to load onto ferries and be taken across the river. And today, the Cherokee Nation arranges for them to be ferried across on a pontoon boat. So the riders each take their bike, and you think, oh, well, that's, modern convenience. How nice. It's a very solemn trip for them because, Will does talk to them before they all aborted, and said, look, for your ancestors, when, even though the land used to be ours across, by the time removal happens, that is now part of the United States. Like someone coming across this river and coming to the Cherokee Nation is having a passport, to enter, right? So at the time of removal, these, ancestors leaving and going across this river, they know that they are never coming home, right? They are now in the United States. They're in a foreign territory. And it's a very real touch point in the trip of like, okay, we're not in what the homelands were at the time of removal. Like I say, the Cherokee had a much larger land base previously, but by the time of removal, they, crossing that river. And so it takes a different tenor after that when they're traveling. So there are lots of things that, like I say, they're constantly processing, all of these things as they're riding, and yet keeping up with the physical demands of the ride too. And I just was
it's incredible.
And grateful for the wonderful support around them of the Cherokee Nation and for the Eastern Band riders that joined with us as well. Just all the people taking care of them, because there's a lot to experience.
Yeah. The physical demands and the emotional demands of those moments. And the way you talk about that moment and crossing the river and leaving behind the land, for me as a reader, that was just an incredibly powerful point in the book. As someone who's non-native, to experience the specific places along the way and what they mean, I felt like I was on the ride on some level, even though obviously I'm reading it and it's a vicarious experience. But that close connection to each step along the way was really powerful for me. So I'm wondering, for both of you, for non-native readers such as myself, what is one takeaway that you would hope would linger after finishing this book?
I hope that they know this difficult chapter in our country's history did occur. But it's a choice, right? It's a choice to whether that is repeated. And we can all make different choices every day. We do not have to repeat this. We know, that there are people being held in internment. We know young people are being held in detention centers and in internment camps. We can make different choices, but that this is part of our nation's history. And unfortunately, it's not something that has been included in the curriculum. And so we think that it's important for everybody to know all of our country's history, right? I mean, if we're going to be informed community members, we all need to know that.
I think the lessons in the book are good, just to give everybody a basic background of what happened and why it happened, and that people didn't forget. I mean, this is a memorial ride, we call it that, and we still remember what happened, even though it's been almost 200 years. In some ways, it's been 200 years almost, but we're still recovering from it. When you look at some aspects of our tribe, I hope non-native readers will understand that it was devastating for us to lose that land and to lose that many people. Messed up family lines. We almost lost all of our arts that we had. It's just, if you're trying to survive day to day, you're not worried about making a pot or making bead work, or you're just trying to survive. So those things didn't come back until the next century. I just hope it's a good lesson for people to understand what happened, and to know we're still here, and we're still we still remember our ancestors.
And it's one thing to understand something that has happened in the past as much as anyone can understand something that they didn't experience firsthand. And it's yet another to hold on to that as you live your present. And in this particular moment in time, as Traci has said, where we are seeing people put into detention, and we are seeing people taken from one place and removed to another, often without anyone's knowledge or information. We can understand that these actions are still at work in the world today and in the United States of America today. In what ways do each of you think of storytelling, and storytelling for young people in particular, as a way not just to honor history, though that's such an important element of this, but also to leverage that history to shape the present and the future?
I see it as a bridge. I think it's very important for all of us to know the history, but understand that we are creating history every day.
Every
Like, we
day.
are actors in that history. And so storytelling helps us to understand the history, but also understand that we're creating stories daily with our own actions, the things that we are writing, the things that we are saying, the ways that we are carrying out our lives, the choices we're making. And that absolutely affects the future,
Yeah.
right? For generations after us, they are affected
Yeah.
by the things that we are doing right now. And so, whereas for Cherokee people, as Will said, we live with the effects of that still. We would not be in what is now the northeast corner of Oklahoma. We just simply wouldn't
Right.
live here because we would never have been moved from our homelands.
Right.
So there's things that are still happening to us living in what is now, within Oklahoma. And we have to deal with a state government here. In addition, we have our own, tribal government. We have our own chief and legislature and courts, and so
Mhm.
you have that dynamic. You have the state dynamic. You have the federal dynamic. All of those things are still very much a part of Cherokee people's lives. And as he said, also trying to reclaim those things that may have been taken from you, right? Language, traditional knowledge
Yeah.
around plants, environment, culture, the arts, all of those things. So I hope young people understand that storytelling is, our oldest way of transmitting knowledge. It's our oldest way of creating connection too.
Mm.
And those are critical
Yeah.
for us as we think about what has come before and what will be after us, because we are right, in that place to be that bridge. And it's exciting. It's also a responsibility.
Yeah.
I think on the storytelling aspect of this, all the years I've been out there with the writers, I was also reporting for our newspaper, Cherokee Phoenix, and so I would do short stories during the evening, just to recap the day, or post some photos on social media, use my nice camera or my Canon to capture really nice photos of them writing, just mainly for them. A lot of times for their record. When they got home, I would share those photos with them. But also, part of this program is we tell the writers, especially the youth, to go home and back to their communities, back to their high schools or colleges, and tell these stories that they've learned, tell this history they've learned, and spread it that way. Spread the knowledge that way. And a lot of them do, and they'll always have these stories with them, and the photographs to go with it. So, I was always made sure I told some of their stories, and some of the stories that were occurring out there, and had plenty of photos to go along with those stories. And so some of them make photo books when they get home, so they can take them to their community to show their community what they saw and what they experienced. So I always did that, and mostly just to encourage them to tell the story in their way when they got home, to share it. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. And I think that this book is so powerful on so many levels. It's visually appealing. It envelops you in the ride from the moment you start reading it. The bilingual chapter introductions are really powerful reinforcement of the Cherokee culture that permeates the book. And so for those of you who have been listening to this conversation, if you have not yet had the opportunity to read the book, I think you're going to learn so much about about the original Trail of Tears, but you're going to learn so much about Cherokee culture, about the youth leadership program that the Ride of Remembrance represents, the incredible tenacity of young people who set out to accomplish a goal and stick with it through the challenges, physical and emotional. And of course, when we look back to 5 years ago and just the challenges of navigating 2021 as we were moving out of that initial wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's so much that the book touches upon that speaks to the human spirit and endurance, cultural connection and community, ways of taking collective action, the intergenerational mentorship that Will spoke of. And so for all readers, for teachers, for librarians, for parents who are considering purchasing this book, for young people, for the young people who read it, there's just so many layers here for all of us and so many ways in which we can reflect on what happened in the past, what's happening in the present to let us know about the past, and all of the ways that every single one of us can take action to make sure that we have a stronger and brighter future for all people. So thank you so much for spending time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.